It's really interesting when people ask me questions like that, like how many parts Aboriginal you don't really look like you're a real Aboriginal. And I think it's a really good opportunity to educate people about what a real Aboriginal is.
And a lot of people talk about the coffee analogy. You have a cup of coffee, you can keep putting milk in it, but it's still coffee, that kind of thing. But for me, probably the most important part of why we don't judge our Aboriginality or our indigeneity, in fact, by our skin colour, is it's a lot more. What's in your heart is far more important than what's on your skin.
It's about our connection, really, our connection to each other, to our culture, and to our homelands.
For the people that are well-intentioned and curious, it's a really good opportunity to educate. So I think the way I approach it is I say to them, look, I really welcome your question, but just so you know, there's a long-standing history of this blood quantum phenomenon, and I actually don't subscribe to that. The blood quantum is the percentage of whether or not you fit into an Indigenous background or not.
It presumes that access to university only happens when you put your application in. The pipeline in terms of accessing university is also about what home life is like. It's about education opportunities from birth, not just at the point of entry at a university. We know that Indigenous people have systematically been denied access to the education system in this country. We have to do something about that.
It's not just Aboriginal people who have an entry pathway. There are rural medical students out there that have a pathway as well. So there are different pathways out there, and I wouldn't say any of them are easier. And having gone through a process like that myself, it was not easier. There are different hurdles that you have to go through, different assessment criteria that you have to meet, and you're always then reflecting on that. You have been given this opportunity to attend medical school, and it's an amazing opportunity, and you don't want to let people down. So it's not an easy pathway.
I got asked about entry into medicine and if it was easier or what I had to do, and you have to do you still have to do the interview process, and you still have to do a few of the other tests, but I'd say, look, they need more Aboriginal doctors and Aboriginal communities, because how many of you guys here want to go and work in an Aboriginal community? And none of them would acknowledge that they wouldn't. So that's right, and that's why they need more Aboriginal doctors.
The different entries into medicine have come about because out of these 100,000 doctors in Australia, there are very few Aboriginal doctors. So while we make up 3% of the general population, we make up less than 1% of the medical population.
I have graduated with the same requirement. The entry criteria might have been different for me, but I had to prove academic capability. I had to prove a commitment to my goals to be a doctor. I had to prove that I could communicate the way a doctor should be able to communicate, and I have graduated with the same criteria that were expected of my non-Indigenous peers.
It's an interesting question that people ask about our access to special privileges such as scholarships. In actual fact, we probably get about the same amount of scholarships access as anybody else. We're just a much smaller population, so it's actually easier to access in some ways. But having said that, there's a whole lot of things that most Aboriginal people are disadvantaged in Australia, and that's kind of three levels, probably socially, culturally and financially disadvantaged. So it doesn't matter whether you look at remote or urban, there's still quite a big deficit in income between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in Australia. So these scholarships are sometimes the only way that somebody can get into an institution.
Scholarships are vital, but scholarships are open for everyone.
You think about why would you do a scholarship? What are you trying to achieve there? And really, mostly scholarships are about helping people achieve equity in some kind of place.
I got a rural health scholarship, which meant that I had bonded rural service on completion of my undergraduate degree, which was available to all students. It wasn't Indigenous specific, yet I had to frequently respond to the fact that I must have gotten something special in order to achieve what I have achieved.
When we train a doctor well to deal with Aboriginal people, Torres Strait Islander people, to deal with Indigenous people better, they're a better doctor for everyone. And we need to do it because our people are the sickest people in the country.
A really great lecturer once said to a class that I was in that no matter where you are, you should find out what percentage of Indigenous people live in your community, the community where you work. And you should take a look at how many of those people are walking through your door. And whether you live in a place where it's 1% or 3% or 10% of people, if that percentage of your clients, your patients, isn't Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, then you're doing something wrong.
So to understand any human being that's sitting in front of you, in medical school we are taught that we have to know about the history of what they've gone through to bring them to face you. And the same applies to population health issues. You have to understand the context of what someone has endured, what a group of people have endured to get them to the point that they're at now.
And the thing is, learning Aboriginal history, well, that's Australia's history. It's not actually specific to just Aboriginal people. This is our history as a nation. So I think in order to practice well in Australia, you need to understand that bit of history and you need to be able to deal with Aboriginal people.
There are a lot of students that aren't that keen on learning about Aboriginal health and rural health and all those issues, and that's up to them. But I see it as a benefit because you get to look at health problems in a holistic way.
There are expectations placed on the Indigenous student, sometimes by teaching staff, sometimes by fellow students, to be the expert on all things Indigenous. And I often say to students that you have a right to be a student and not to refuse to be the cultural educator, and not think that if you cannot answer those questions that are placed upon you that you are somehow not really Indigenous or less Indigenous because you can't answer that.